Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for hanging in. My name is Shannon Holston. I'm the Chief of Policy and Programs at the National Council on Teacher Quality, that organization that did that report, that looked into teacher ed. Many teacher ed programs might not like us, but that's okay, because we're focused on making sure that teachers are prepared to teach reading, and we're not saying our analysis by any means is perfect, but it certainly can serve as a warning indicator light to bring attention to the issue that we're not preparing our teachers as well as they should be. I've been in education for over 20 years, started out as a high school teacher. I've worked at a university. I've worked at a district level as a supervisor of school performance, working with teachers and principals and school leadership teams to use data to help drive school improvement. And I've worked at a state agency. After I recovered from that, now I work for the National Council on Teacher Quality. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. For those of you who don't know much about NCTQ, we focus on 3 institutions that we think have a lot of influence over teachers. One is teacher prep, one is state policy, and the other are teacher contracts. So we have a database in each set of those, one that looks at teacher contracts from 150 districts across the country, one that includes state policies related to certain areas of like reading. We have another major report coming out in January around state reading policies, and then we focus on teacher prep programs. So today, obviously, we're talking about teacher prep. You already heard a lot about why this matters, so I don't think I need to go into why this matters necessarily. And somebody else brought this up, the lady who was sitting in the middle here, around teachers just aren't being prepared or well prepared to know what to do to use the most effective strategies, and it's I think affecting teacher retention as well as, most importantly, our kids every day in the classroom. So that's a little bit of background. I want to take a few minutes to go over what our analysis looks like, because we did go through a major revision process when we started to do our analysis this last time. So what we look for is we look for evidence that the teacher prep program is covering the 5 core components of reading, which are phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. These 5 components are from the National Reading Panel. That was also mentioned, that was like decades ago. And so it's not necessarily new information, it's just using what we know the science tells us are the most effective methods. So how do we do this? We ask programs for evidence. It could be syllabi, it could be assignments, it could be lecture notes, it could be anything. Basically, it's a document review to see how well or adequately they're covering each core component. We do this through 4 elements. So we look for instructional hours. Those are the 4 blue boxes on the bottom. How much time is the program dedicating to teaching phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, et cetera? So each of these are across the 5 components. Objective measures of knowledge just simply means, do they test candidates' knowledge? Do they have a graded written assignment, a test, a quiz, something where they're assessing candidate knowledge around reading and reading strategies? Practice or application, pretty much like it sounds. Do they give candidates specific opportunities to practice working with the students on phonics skills, for example? So do they have opportunities to practice it? And then background materials, we look at anything that's a required reading material. Is it aligned to the research? And does it include anything that might be a contrary practice? And we'll go into those in a little bit. But that's less effective method. Something that's been debunked by the research is not as effective. So basically what we do is we look at all the documents. We have a full protocol that was developed with our expert panel, Linda Diamond, Louisa Motes, Kimiana Burke, Emily Solari from UVA. We have a lot of very well-respected people on our expert panel that helped us develop this protocol. And so we look for evidence across. Basically how it works is you earn up to 3 points in each of the instructional approaches for a total of 12 points for each component. You can earn 8. If you earn 8 out of the 12, you're adequately covering the component. I would say that's a pretty minimal base level design or assessment of adequately covering the component. We also, for the first time, looked at how programs, or if programs, address struggling readers, including students with dyslexia. So do they dedicate time? Do they use instructional materials that are talking about what do you do when you have a struggling reader? What do you do when you have a student with dyslexia? What is dyslexia? What does it look like? Which we already heard a lot about. English language learners, and then a new area that's coming out of the research is speakers of English language varieties, and these are basically students who speak different dialects of English. There's actually over 100 in the country. It could be like Appalachia English, it could be African American English, but that's a new kind of emerging area of research, so we want to see like who is teaching it or is anybody addressing it. So over the last 2 years, we went through a revision process, which I mentioned. We had an expert advisory panel that focused on the content of our analysis to make sure that we're aligned with all the research. We had a technical advisory group that looked at that were comprised of measurement experts that looked at our methodology, our inter-rater reliability, and those types of things to make sure our analysis was sound. And then we also had a public comment period where we put out our revision and asked for feedback. And overwhelmingly, people agreed that, yes, we should be looking at the 5 components. Yes, documents can tell you something. They don't tell you everything, but they can tell you something about what is happening in a program. We made a couple of changes. One, we increased the amount of instructional time for the 5 components. So we've actually been doing this analysis. We've done it over the last 10 years about 4 times. The first time was in 2013 as an organization. And back then, we only looked for 2 hours of instructional time, and that's not credit hours, that's just basic instructional time. Like, did the program spend 2 hours teaching phonemic awareness, which is very minimal. So we got a lot of feedback last time that said, hey, you really need to up this. This isn't adequate, and it doesn't necessarily take the same amount of time to teach phonemic awareness as it does fluency, as it does comprehension. These things vary, so that's what we did. We also, for the first time, reviewed for the presence of practices contrary to research. So this is 3Qing, miscue analysis, guided reading, balanced literacy, a couple of the terms that you heard in the last session. So we identified 9 contrary practices. If you do more than 3, you actually get docked a letter grade. Is that the right bar? I'm not sure. We would have loved to made it 0, but I'll show you in a minute. Even with that, only 25% of programs across the country earned an A. So we've got a lot of ways to go. And lastly, we, for the first time, made sure that practice was a specific component that we looked for. In previous evaluations, it's not something that we looked for separately, and we really believed, and we heard from the field that teachers got to get in there and practice this stuff. You get better doing anything, the more, well, hopefully, you at least have that opportunity to practice it. But you should get better the more you do it. Sorry, I was just having a flashback. I coach a softball team, so I was like, well, if you swing bad 100 times, it might not be better, but anyway. All right, moving along. Sorry. So how basically it works is we send a voluntary request to programs. In this last review, we sent it March in 2022. We do a voluntary request for materials to evaluate programs. If we don't get materials by May, then we did a public records request or an open records request, which public institutions should be responsive to, given that they're public entities. And we do look for any publicly available documents. Some universities actually require that they post their syllabi online, and so we may pull them down if documents are publicly available. We analyze submissions. We do send them in January. We sent preliminary score reviews, so we do send the information to programs, say, hey, here's everything. We spent a big spreadsheet. Here's everything we found. If you have other documents that you didn't send us the first time, or if you feel like something is misrepresented, that's their chance to kind of correct the record. And then in May, they were sent final scores, and we released the report in June. It's a 693. We're actually over 700 programs now. Some programs came and wanted to be reviewed actually after the report came out. So that's kind of our process. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, to give you an understanding of like how we review these programs before I dive into the Kansas-specific data. So here's the Kansas sample. We had 4 institutions voluntarily submit documents. We had 2 that submitted open records requests and were evaluated. We had 2 ORR, means open records requests, denied. So 2 universities that denied our open records request based upon the fact that syllabi are intellectual property of the instructors. And then private institution denials. We can't compel private institutions to give us documents. So private institutions denied our request to be evaluated. So what we found, so we did only have the opportunity to evaluate 6 universities in Kansas. Half of those programs did earn an A or an A+. So on the chart, you'll see the blue bars are the national percentages, and the orange bar are Kansas. So nationwide, only 28% of programs covered all 5 components nationally. Kansas is a little higher, obviously, I would say, though, but we only evaluated 6 universities across the state. So just keep that in mind. We had 1 university that got a B or covered 4 components, and then 2 programs that got an F, which means they covered 0 components. So that means they had limited evidence that they covered those 5 components at any in-depth level. So how did that bear out? Here's where the grade stood. On the left-hand side, you'll see which programs earned an A or an A+. University of Kansas earned a B. Newman and Washburn earned an F, and the other 3 up top earned an A. And then the unknown on the right-hand side. We think our analysis serves as an early warning indicator system. We definitely think that Kansas should, and I'll get into this a little bit at the end, like do their own review, as in a lot of states are choosing to do their own audits and dig a little deeper because they can compel all institutions to comply. But it certainly does raise a question. You have about half of programs that are doing a fairly decent job of teaching the science of reading, and another half that are behind the 8 ball, or definitely as an F program, means that they are definitely not covering enough of the science of reading. So digging a little bit deeper, on the bottom of this graph, you'll see each of the 5 components. So we looked at, which components are being covered adequately across the Kansas programs that we were able to evaluate. On the positive side, we had 2/3 of the programs covered phonemic awareness. Nationwide, phonemic awareness was the least covered component and has been in our analysis for the last 10 years, which is pretty alarming considering like phonemic awareness is about like the alphabetic principle and like letters and sounds. And so it's pretty important to learn how to read. So that is definitely concerning from a nationwide standpoint. On the positive of the programs we did evaluate, 2 out of 3 covered phonemic awareness. And then fluency lags a little bit nationwide and in Kansas as well. You can see the other trends kind of bear out here. So in looking at background materials, this is really interesting because we analyze every single textbook, article, video, anything that they list as a required resource, because this is material that teacher candidates are getting exposed to. And they're either qualified as exemplary, acceptable, or unacceptable. And just to give you an example, an unacceptable material that we would find would be like one textbook had a whole section on guess the word. And it would be like ways to teach your students how to guess at the word, which, as our previous session dove into, like that's not gonna help kids read. So that's something that would make a textbook or an article unacceptable. So in Kansas, we found that about 50% of programs only have acceptable texts or articles or resources, which is great. Then we had 2 programs that had mixed resources, so they had some acceptable and unacceptable, and then 1 program had unacceptable in each of the 5 components. So we look at this in each of the 5 components. Instructional hours. So on this one, the light blue is full points, the dark blue is partial points, and the red is no points. So this is looking at instructional hours and if they met our instructional hours kind of target, which we set with our expert panel. So in the areas of phonemic awareness, fluency, and comprehension, most of the programs, all except for 1, earned only partial points, which means they didn't meet the full extent of the instructional hour target. And the instructional hour target, just to be clear, is not, we think it's very reasonable. It's like 4 hours in fluency. It's like 8 in phonemic awareness. This is instructional hours that we analyze through syllabi or lecture documents. Good news. Every program provided multiple opportunities for graded assignments across the components. This is also one of the easier things to evaluate in terms of tests, quizzes, graded assignments, those types of things. And practice opportunities looks a lot like background materials, where half the programs are giving multiple opportunities to practice these things. 2 programs have a mix or 1 opportunity, and 1 program had no opportunities to practice any of these things. So in this regard, what we find a lot of times is they're saying, like, go into the classroom and be with such and such mentor teacher. But they're not saying, like, go and develop a phonics lesson, teach it, reflect on it, those types of things. So it's really getting down to leaving a lot to chance about whether teacher candidates are actually getting opportunities to practice certain skills. So the contrary practices they mentioned before are on the left-hand side. There are 9 of them. These are what we would say are bad practices or the least effective, lesser effective methods. And you'll see even some of the better performing universities in Kansas teach some practices. If you want to investigate who does what, you can find it all on our website. I'll share with you at the end. We provide very detailed course findings. But we definitely find evidence of practices contrary to the research. And even though 3 queuing might be separate, there's elements of the queuing system in balanced literacy, guided reading, running records. So they kind of do bleed into each other. And this is the first time we included contrary practices. And I'm really glad that we did, because what we're finding in a lot of programs is it's not that they're not teaching nothing about reading, but they're saying, well, teachers need to have a basket of strategies, and teachers need to have, and we're like, well, no, the research actually says there are more effective ways, or they're the most effective ways to teach children to learn how to read. And so we've actually been doing a lot of education that people are like, well, why is 3 queuing bad? Why is running records bad? And so and there's a lot of misnomer about terms being used that kind of mean the same thing but don't mean the same thing. And so we're having a lot of really good discussions nationwide about these practices, balanced literacy, leveled text, those types of things, about why they're not the best practices, which is a good thing, I think. We also looked at struggling readers, English learners, and students who speak language varieties. So really strong in terms of instructional hours and testing candidates' knowledge on struggling readers. 6 out of 6 programs covered that, and so that was a strength. Areas for improvement would be instructional materials or practice opportunities. The Florida Center for Reading Research, if you're interested in learning more about it, has a plethora of research. And then I also included, so English learners and the English language varieties is a really new area, so we just provided some resources on the right-hand side if you're interested in learning more about that. English learners, again, was no practice opportunities and low in instructional hours. That might be something dependent upon the university program that they need to improve upon as well. The previous session also talked about Read Lions. Read Lions has it's called the 10 Maxims of Reading, I think. If you Googled that, it's a really quick, here are 10 things we know about how to teach, what we know about teaching kids how to read. And for your greater community, it's a really good resource that talks regular people language and not edu-speak. So that's another good resource, just wanted to throw out there to you. So if you want to dive in more about the programs, if you go to our website and if you go to nctq.org/the review, it'll take you to our scores and look for our reading foundations. You can search by state, you can search by program. We have detailed course level findings where you can look and see everything. We've made our analysis really transparent this time around. We also have an 80-page technical manual. If you want to read more about why some of those contrary practices are bad, we have pages and pages of the research that's aligned to that as well. So I thought about, all right, if I'm a school board member, how does this relate to me? I'm not in charge of a teacher prep program. What can I do about this? And here are 5 questions, I think, as a policymaker and advocate that you can think about. So, does my state have detailed standards for what candidates should know and be able to do aligned to the science of reading? It's really, really difficult to hold prep programs accountable if we don't have detailed standards for what they should be doing or should not be doing. Does my state evaluate whether elementary teacher prep programs are aligned with scientifically based reading instruction? what we've learned in the past is that teacher prep programs typically go through like a 7-year approval cycle that's focused on the institution, not necessarily on the elementary teacher prep program. And they're definitely not focused on, okay, are they teaching the science of reading specifically? So we need to take a look at our teacher prep program approval processes statewide to see if we can do this. States have approached this a couple of ways. They have either revised their program approval process, which Colorado did, and really focused on the science of reading. They actually held the approval of 5 institutions for a year until they got their act together and aligned to the science of reading. Or some other states in the last legislative session, like Ohio and Indiana, have just wanted to do specific audits of elementary teacher prep programs. So they specifically have said, we're just going to audit our programs specifically for the science of reading. So those are a couple of statewide initiatives that, or not initiatives, but strategies that as a body of school board members could be something to advocate for. I think Kansas is on the road, on a good road as far as looking at the standards, but not sure exactly, just to be frank, ensure it's like program approval processes to check and see if programs are actually doing it or not. The last 3 are more related to you specifically as a school board member for hiring. So which programs do we hire from? Are they aligned with the science of reading? You could check out our grades, you could ask recent graduates, you could look at their student performance data. Are there patterns that emerge that some prep programs are better than others? So this may be helpful. I think if you find someone that's not teaching the science of reading, think about using your position or consumer power to influence them and try and get them to change, because I don't know, but most districts across the country need every good teacher that they can get. So the second thing is, do we use instructional materials aligned with the science of reading? There's a lot of really strong research that high quality instructional materials really matter. Teachers aren't spending their time looking for things. Teachers there's actually research that says if you just gave a teacher high quality instructional materials aligned with the science, that they would, like a first-year teacher would be as effective as a third-year teacher, which there's a lot of growth in those first several years. Another research study came out and said that just changing to high quality instructional materials is actually 40 times more cost effective and impactful than class size reduction. So there's a lot of evidence in just using better materials will help teachers and making sure that they're aligned to the science of reading. If you're curious about this and say, I don't know if my curriculum is aligned to the science of reading, there's an organization called EdReports, edreports.org, where you can look up, and they have a specific button now that actually just came out last week that says science of reading, and it'll give you what their scores were in their analysis of if the curriculum is aligned to the science of reading. So that's a resource, or you can email me, happy to dig into that as well. And then the last one is, do my teachers have the knowledge and skills needed to implement the science of reading? I think, talking about the letters training is a great example. When I worked in the district, and I love this job, working with teachers and principals and school leadership teams, we were a very high poverty district. We were underperforming. And so I was taking school leadership teams through a root cause analysis, like what is the problem? And so we go through the whole 5 whys and a whole process, and they're like, we don't think our teachers know how to teach reading. And I was like, okay, that's a problem. And they're like, I said, well, how are you going to confirm or deny that, right? Part of a root cause analysis. They're like, well, let's survey our teachers. So we got a survey the teachers. Yeah, teachers are like, I don't know what to do when a student struggles. They did not understand phonemic awareness. And so we were like, all right, let's start there. And really, these are, to the comments earlier, very well-meaning teachers who worked a lot. They were just working hard, really hard, just not with the right strategies. So, yeah.
So, I'm a graduate of Kansas State University. I love Kansas State University. But I believe KSVE recently eliminated the certification testing process to become teachers in the state of Kansas. Okay. And Kansas State University refused to comply with the request to analyze the program.
That's a good question. Yeah. 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 And I think for, that's one reason why some states are taking a more, I know you all are school board members, but some states are taking a more legislative action to do some type of audit to compel some type of review, because, you know, and make that information transparent, from a consumer standpoint, in terms of people who want to be teachers. You know, we're going to spend thousands of dollars. Like, where am I going to make sure I know I'm prepared? And from a district perspective, you know, who am I hiring? So I think that's a really good question. As a school board member, you know, I think districts are often very, very busy, you know, running day-to-day schools, as they should be. But districts do have consumer power. You know, we're not going to take your student teachers if we can't have a meeting and see how you all are aligned to what we want to do here in our district. We're not going to, you know, it's hard to say we're not going to hire your graduates, but I have a fellow colleague who has done that. And so I think there is some consumer power that people can flex, you know, if necessary, as a possibility, if you're ready to do that. Yeah, yeah. They're already in the system. It's for anybody new. Yeah, and I think, yeah. It's very late. But what we would say is that if there's a nursing shortage, we don't just say nurses don't have to take their licensure exam, right? If there's a doctor shortage, we don't, like, you know, we don't say that for medical professionals. Why would we say that for teachers? Which I would say we have some evidence, at least in a number of programs, that is not happening to the extent that we want it to happen. And public universities in particular get a lot of money, like full blank. So I think these are, even if you're not, you know, I'm not a reading expert or those types of things, or I'm new on the school board, these are some questions that may be helpful to you, and be happy to connect on resources. But I would say try and see how you can use your voice either in your local community or your broader state community, how we can do, you know, impact to get them more aligned. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I started to research on it, but there's a lot of them out there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the ones that are specifically aligned with the science of reading?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I'll be happy to share. I think, like I said, Ed Reports they look at a lot of things related to what high quality means. They just released kind of their science of reading alignment. There are other districts, other states that have approved lists for alignment to the science of reading. I'd be happy to share as like a barometer or first place to start. Arkansas has done a lot of work around this. Rhode Island, edreports.org is like they're a third-party organization. Ed Reports, E-D, yeah, sorry, EDREPORTS .org, yep. And then I can send you, and you can share with members if you want the other state lists that we think are, yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Georgia, actually, they have a literacy commission for their that kind of is in charge of implementing their Right to Read Act, and they have a group of teachers that is in charge of creating the list. And we have other people concerned that list is actually a good list. So we're actually in the process of cross-referencing several state lists right now. So I'd be happy to share those results, and because there's a lot of programs out there, and people want that good information. Yeah, I think we covered recommendations, or basically a lot of the flip side to what I talked about in terms of questions. We already talked some question answer, and I'm just happy to follow up and be a support for anybody who wants to have any questions afterwards. I'll share those reading lists, and then we can go from there. Let's see if I can be clear. NCTQ, Nancy Cat Tom Quality.org. Thank you. Thank you.
Your quality, very good job. Really appreciate your points.